My parents skipped my graduation party because I didn't graduate with honors like my cousin, so I gave a speech thanking everyone except them. Is this what you wanted? I whispered into the mic. Now they're claiming I embarrassed them. It was the spring of 2018, and I had just finished my college journey. The word journey is generous, because it felt more like a battle at times. My grades weren't terrible, but they weren't anything to be proud of either. The entire process of getting my degree was a struggle, mainly because I had always felt like I was living in the shadow of my cousin, Serena. Serena had been the perfect student, honors classes, awards, scholarships, the whole 9 yards. It wasn't just that she was successful, but that my parents, particularly my mom, couldn't stop comparing me to her. It didn't matter what I achieved or how hard I worked, Serena was always the gold standard of success. When she graduated a year before me, it was a huge celebration. My parents hosted an extravagant party for her. The whole family came together, and everyone was proud. Meanwhile, I was still scrambling to get through my courses. I passed, but it wasn't easy. I didn't graduate with honors. I didn't even graduate in the top 50% of my class. The truth is, I was just happy to finish. When it came time for my graduation, things were different. My parents didn't seem excited. There wasn't any of the enthusiasm that Serena had gotten. My mom would send me texts, always vague, always casual, like she was almost embarrassed that I was graduating at all. She'd say things like, "Hope you're ready for your big day," or "I bet you're looking forward to your ceremony." I couldn't shake the feeling that they didn't care. I wasn't a shining star like Serena. My accomplishments seemed irrelevant to them. Even when I tried to talk to them about my excitement, I could feel the distance between us. The day of the graduation ceremony arrived, and there they were, my parents. They didn't show up. No call. No text. Just nothing. They'd given me the excuse that something came up at work, which I couldn't believe. My mind raced as I stood on that stage, receiving my diploma in front of thousands of other students. I scanned the crowd, hoping to see them there, but they were nowhere to be found. I told myself I was being dramatic, that maybe it wasn't a big deal. But deep down, I knew the truth. They hadn't cared enough to show up. When I got home after the ceremony, I still tried to hold on to the idea that maybe they were busy and would at least make it to the graduation party. But no, they didn't. My parents hadn't planned anything elaborate like they did for Serena, and when I called to ask if they were coming, I was told they might stop by later. It felt like a slap in the face. I was crushed, but I didn't want to admit it to anyone. I went through with the party anyway, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe because I felt like I deserved it. Maybe because it had always been expected that I throw a big celebration. But by the time the event started, I felt like a fraud, like I was throwing a party for something I hadn't truly earned in their eyes. The party was in full swing by the time the speeches were scheduled. I'd written a speech, of course. I had to. It felt like a formality. It was a thank you speech, thanking my professors, my friends, the few family members who had supported me throughout this entire journey. But when I stood up, mic in hand, I saw my parents sitting off to the side, barely acknowledging me. They were talking amongst themselves, not even making eye contact with me. The empty chair beside them, the one meant for them to sit together with me, was a glaring reminder of how absent they had been, both literally and emotionally, throughout this entire ordeal. I started my speech just like I had planned, thanking the people who had truly helped me get to this point. I thanked Aunt Olivia, who had always supported me. I thanked my friends who stayed by me, even when I felt like giving up. And then I thanked Serena. "Thank you to my cousin Serena," I said, my voice catching a little. "You've been a great role model, and I've learned so much from your success." I watched Serena smile in her seat, beaming with pride as always. But then, I paused. I knew what I had to do. My mom and dad were still watching me, barely showing any emotion. Their disappointment was like a heavy weight pressing down on me. And in that moment, I snapped. I didn't thank them. Not then. Not ever. Instead, I turned to face the crowd, my hand still gripping the mic. I didn't look at them directly, but I could feel their eyes burning into me. I've been through a lot to get here, I continued, my voice growing steadier. And while I'm grateful for the support I've received from the people I've mentioned, there's one group of people who haven't really been there for me. I'm here today despite everything. The room fell silent, and I could feel the air shift. My parents' faces flushed with surprise, and for the first time that night, they looked at me, not with pride or joy, but with something else. Something dark. I took a deep breath. And then, almost like I couldn't stop myself, I whispered into the mic, "Is this what you wanted?" My voice was quiet but sharp. "Is this enough for you?" There was a tense pause. The guests were whispering to each other, unsure of how to react. My parents' eyes widened. My dad looked like he wanted to yell, but he didn't. Instead, they both stood up and started walking towards the door, not saying a word to me. I ended the speech shortly after, my heart pounding in my chest. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to enjoy the party, but the bitterness of what had just happened stayed with me. I could hear murmurs from the guests, but nothing mattered. It was too late. I had said what I needed to say. After the party, the fallout came swiftly. My parents didn't call me for days. When they finally did, it was my mom who reached out. Her voice was cold, distant, and full of disbelief. "How could you do that to us?" she asked, her words laced with anger. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone." What was that all about? I didn't hesitate to respond. What was it about? I echoed. You couldn't even show up to my graduation. You didn't even try to hide how disappointed you were in me. You've always compared me to Serena, like I was never good enough. And you know what? I'm done trying to make you proud. I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not just to fit into your idea of success. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. My mom was likely struggling to find words, trying to process the anger that had been building in me for years. "You've always made everything so difficult," she said finally. "Why couldn't you just be more like Serena? You could have had a great future if you just tried harder." I took a deep breath. I didn't need to be like Serena. I just needed to be myself. "But you never cared about that, did you?" The line went quiet. Eventually, the conversation ended, and things between my parents and I remained tense. They didn't apologize, and I didn't expect them to. I hadn't said those things for an apology, I had said them because I needed to free myself from the weight of their expectations. It's been a few years since that night, and though my relationship with my parents has shifted, it hasn't fully healed. They've tried reaching out more, but I can't shake the feeling that they're doing it out of guilt rather than genuine concern. Things between Serena and I have settled, too. We talk occasionally, but the constant comparisons have faded. She's living her life, and I'm living mine. What I've learned through all of this is that my worth isn't defined by my parents' approval, or anyone else's. I don't need them to validate me. I don't need anyone's approval to feel proud of what I've achieved. The person I am today is enough, even if they can't see it. The years that followed that dramatic moment at my graduation party were a blur of changes. My relationship with my parents didn't improve overnight, but the events of that night had left a mark on all of us. I didn't expect things to go back to normal right away, but I did expect them to try. The phone calls came sporadically, always brief and somewhat uncomfortable. My mom would ask about my life, but it always felt more like a formality than genuine interest. It wasn't just the awkward conversations, though, it was the unspoken tension. Every time I saw them, there was this invisible wall between us, a space that hadn't been there before. They hadn't apologized for what happened. They hadn't even acknowledged how much their absence at my graduation had hurt me. It was as if they hoped time would heal everything without the need for confrontation. But I couldn't move on without addressing it. Every time we spoke, I was reminded of that night, of the words I'd said into the mic, the way I had called them out, and the way they'd left without a word. Sometimes, I felt guilty. Was I too harsh? Maybe I could have handled things differently. But other times, I wondered if they needed to hear those words, even if it hurt them. Maybe it was the only way they would understand how deeply their favoritism had affected me. The quiet aftermath had me questioning myself a lot. I spent hours replaying the scene in my mind. In a way, I felt liberated for finally standing up for myself, but I also knew that some part of me had hoped for reconciliation, hoped that after that night, they would finally realize the pain they had caused and come to terms with it. But it never came. I couldn't remember the last time I saw my parents truly look at me with pride. I wasn't sure if I could even expect that anymore, and in some ways, that made me sadder than anything. They were never the type to show emotion. I had learned to read their silence as a form of disappointment. So when I didn't receive the apology I thought I might, I tried to move on. But moving on doesn't mean forgetting. The first time I saw them after the party, it was at a family dinner. Serena was there, of course. It seemed like my parents were always more comfortable when she was around. She had been the first one to make a gesture, sending me a message to ask if I was okay after everything went down. I wasn't sure why, but it actually made me feel better to hear from her. We were family, and despite the rivalry that had often existed between us, there was still a bond. But the family dinner that followed the speech was different. I noticed it immediately, the way my parents tried to act as if nothing had happened. We were all seated at the table, and they didn't acknowledge the awkwardness at all. My dad passed me the mashed potatoes without saying a word. My mom asked about my job prospects, but she didn't look me in the eye as she asked it. Serena sat beside me, trying to make casual conversation, but I couldn't help feeling the undercurrent of tension beneath everything. They were pretending. "I heard you're looking at marketing firms," my mom finally said, her voice clipped. I nodded, trying not to let the weight of her words hit me. "Yeah, I've got a few interviews lined up." "Good. That's good," she replied, almost too quickly. It felt more like a command than a conversation. Serena, noticing the awkwardness, attempted to change the subject. "Have you tried any of the local places yet? I heard some of them have great development programs." I smiled at her, thankful for the diversion. But even in the distraction, I could feel my parents still watching me. Their disapproval was tangible, but it wasn't something they would ever openly admit. They had always preferred silence over confrontation, a trait that had always frustrated me. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself slipping back into the same old patterns. The guilt would occasionally rear its head. Was I being too hard on them? Was I still angry over something I should have let go of? I'd find myself pacing around my apartment, overthinking every conversation we'd had in the last few years. And every time, I'd remind myself of what had happened. They hadn't come to my graduation. They hadn't celebrated me the way they celebrated Serena. And no matter how much I wished they would understand, I knew that, deep down, I was the one who needed to come to terms with it. I wasn't looking for an apology anymore. I wasn't expecting them to suddenly change. But I did want them to recognize that their actions hurt me. And if they never acknowledged that, then I would have to accept that my relationship with them would never be the same. One day, a few months later, I received a message from my mom. She never texted me unless it was absolutely necessary, so when I saw her name on my screen, I knew it had to be something important. I opened the message cautiously. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night. I know you're upset, and maybe we haven't done everything right. I don't want you to think we don't care. I just don't know how to make it right, but I'm trying." I stared at the words for a long time, reading and rereading them. It wasn't an apology, not really. But it was an acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong in their approach. My heart began to race as I thought about what this meant. Was this the first step toward healing? Still, something in me held back. I had waited so long for them to come to me, for them to admit how much they had hurt me, that I couldn't bring myself to jump at the first sign of them trying. I didn't know how to feel. Instead of responding right away, I closed my phone and set it down. I needed to think. For years, I had lived under their shadow, constantly trying to please them and fit into the mold they'd made for me. But now I was on my own, and it was time to think about what I wanted, not what they wanted. I spent the next few days contemplating my mom's message. It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but it wasn't nothing either. There was a part of me that wanted to jump at the opportunity, to let it all go and move forward with a kind of resolution I hadn't felt in years. But there was another part of me, the part that had been burned by their indifference and constant comparisons, that wanted to take control of the situation in a way I hadn't before. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had spent years trying to prove myself to them, chasing their approval like a dog after a bone. But the reality was, I was never going to be their version of perfect. And for once, I didn't need to be. A few weeks passed before I saw them again. The text from my mom sat unanswered in my inbox, and in the meantime, I had been focusing on myself. I'd landed a job at a small marketing firm and had been putting my energy into growing my career. It was the first time in my life that I felt like I was living for me, and not for anyone else. That evening, I was invited to a family gathering at Serena's house. It was supposed to be a casual barbecue, nothing too fancy, just the usual family get-together. I wasn't particularly thrilled at the idea, but I knew it was time to face my parents again. I couldn't keep avoiding them forever. I arrived at the party early, hoping to get a moment of calm before things got hectic. Serena was already there, chatting with a few relatives in the corner of the yard. My parents were sitting at the far end of the table, talking to some of the older relatives, laughing like everything was fine. But I could see the way my mom's eyes darted over to me as I approached. There was still that hint of guilt in her expression, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't sure what I expected, but it wasn't this. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile as I walked over to them. My mom stood up first. "You made it. I'm glad you could come." I nodded, taking a seat across from them. Serena wandered over and joined the group, but she didn't say much. She was always the neutral one, never picking sides, always too polite to say anything that might cause a stir. For a moment, there was silence as we all avoided making eye contact. Then, finally, my mom spoke up again. "I wanted to talk to you about the graduation speech. I know it wasn't easy for you, and we know we've made mistakes. It was never our intention to hurt you." Her words weren't exactly a confession, but they were the closest thing to it. She was trying, and that meant something. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I let the silence stretch on for a bit longer, feeling the weight of her words sink in. I wanted to respond, but I wasn't ready to just forgive them yet. I had spent so long suppressing my own feelings, trying to make everyone else happy, that I needed this moment to finally be honest with myself. "I appreciate that," I said slowly, "but it's not just about the speech, or the graduation, or even Serena. It's about how I've been treated my whole life. I've never been enough. No matter what I did, it wasn't good enough." My dad looked away, clearly uncomfortable. My mom's face fell, but she didn't interrupt. For once, they were listening. "I'm not asking for an apology," I continued, my voice growing steadier. "But I need you to understand something. I've been carrying this weight for years. And I've spent so much time hoping you'd see me, truly see me, for who I am. Not compared to Serena, not as some second-best version of her. Just me." There was a long pause, the air thick with unspoken words. Then, to my surprise, Serena spoke up. "You're right," she said quietly. "I didn't realize how much pressure you were under. I thought I was just being supportive, but I see now how it might have made things worse." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was the last person I thought would speak up. But in that moment, I realized something. Serena wasn't my enemy. She had never been the cause of my pain, it was the expectation placed on both of us. I had spent so many years resenting her, seeing her as the golden child, but I realized now that we were both victims of the same pressure. We were both trying to live up to impossible standards. My parents didn't say anything else for a while. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere began to shift. The small talk resumed, but it was different this time. There was a subtle shift in the way my parents interacted with me. They were still distant, but there was less of the usual judgment. Less of the coldness. For the first time in years, they seemed almost tentative around me. As the evening drew to a close, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I hadn't gotten the apology I was expecting, but I had gotten something else, something more important. They were trying. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the grand gesture I had dreamed of, but it was something. I stood up to leave and walked toward the door. My mom called after me, her voice softer than usual. "I'm proud of you, you know. I may not have always shown it the way you needed, but I am proud of who you've become." The words were simple, and they didn't erase everything, but they were enough. I turned back to face her, giving her a small, genuine smile. "Thanks, Mom," I said, and for the first time in a long while, I meant it. I left the barbecue that night with mixed emotions. I had no illusions that everything was fixed, but for the first time, I felt a shift. I didn't need to carry around the anger and resentment anymore. I had said what needed to be said, and I had finally stopped trying to be what they wanted me to be. A few months passed, and my relationship with my parents slowly improved. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. We learned to communicate in ways we hadn't before. They stopped comparing me to Serena, and I stopped holding on to the grudge I had held for so long. As for Serena and I, our relationship blossomed. We weren't rivals anymore, we were family. She wasn't my competition, and I wasn't hers. We were both just trying to figure things out in our own ways. Looking back, I realized that the greatest revenge wasn't in some dramatic confrontation or in proving them wrong. The real victory was in finding peace within myself. I had stopped trying to be what they wanted. I had stopped seeking their approval.